As you know, last Monday was Veterans Day, and our patriotic song today addresses that. Our song today is The Ragged Old Flag, which was written and performed by Johnny Cash. All of us up here are veterans, and we very proudly do this song. So hopefully it's a narrative, and I hope you enjoy it.
It's definitely a narrative. I walked through a county courthouse square. On a park bench, an old man was sitting there. I said, "Your old courthouse is kind of run down." He said, "Nah, it'll do for our little town." I said, "Your old flagpole has leaned a little bit, and that's a ragged old flag you got hanging on it." He said, "Have a seat," and I sat down. "Is this the first time you've been to our little town?" I said, "I think it is." He said, "I don't like to brag, but we're kind of proud of that ragged old flag."
You see that little hole there? That came there when Washington crossed the Delaware. It got powder burned that night. Francis Scott Key sat watching it, writing, "Say, can you see?" And it got a bad rip in New Orleans with Peckingham and Jackson tugging at its seams. It almost fell at the Alamo beside the Texas flag, but she waved on through. She got cut with a sword at Chancellorsville, and she got cut again at Shiloh Hill. There was Robert E. Lee, Beauregard, and Bragg, and the south wind blew hard on that ragged old flag. On Flanders Field in World War I, she got a big hole from a Bertha gun. She turned blood red in World War II, and she hung limp and low a time or two. And she was in Korea and Vietnam. She went where she was sent by Uncle Sam.
She waved on through on ships on the briny foam. And they've about quit waving at her here back home on her own land where she's been abused. She's been burned, dishonored, denied, and refused. And in the government for which she stands has been scandalized throughout the land. And she's getting threadbare and kind of thin. But I believe she's in good shape for the shape she's in, because she's been through the fire before, and she can take a whole lot more. So we raise her up every morning, and we take her down every night. We don't let her touch the ground, and we fold her up right. On second thought, I do like to brag, so I'm mighty proud of that ragged old flag.
Next up is past President Dick Danza, and he is going to do a little rooster finding.
This is my opportunity to raise some money for our charities fund. When I call upon you, I will partially describe an event and ask you to finish describing this event. If you get the answer right, you're going to be fined anyway, but I will add $10 of my own money to that fine. If you get the answer wrong, and somebody, after you've had a chance to try to get it right, if somebody from the crowd shouts out the correct answer, I will donate $5. So the pressure's on you to get it right to get more money for our fund. Now, I've always been amused by these beer commercials for the Dos Equis beer, featuring the most interesting man in the world. I've done some research, and I have learned that the most interesting, those commercials are based on a real guy. And I've found out who that real guy is. It's Joey Rigatoni, otherwise known as the Deuce. And he is here today to confirm his role is to confirm that these historical real life events are being described as they really happened.
That's correct.
Well, thank you, Joey.
Humility keeps me from elucidating.
It keeps you from being lucid?
That too.
All right, okay. Our first contestant is Jason Eby. Jason, will you stand, please?
Jason didn't volunteer for this, but that's all right.
Nobody does volunteer for this,
know,
right?
that's why you picked me.
Yeah, that's right. And you're handy. You're nearby.
Right.
So now, Jason, his classification is construction law with Snell and Wilmer. Jason was recently honored because his construction law practice, which he heads up, is ranked in the top tier, the tier 1 nationally, in the 2020 edition of Best Law Firms. Did I get that right?
Other than that, I wasn't honored other than you announcing it here. So the honor wasn't to me. I was just self-promoting to Monty.
But
It was a group effort,
Yeah,
and
but-
the group did well.
oh, cut the phony humility. You're an attorney. He has $100 on the line here, which you're going to pay no matter what. All right. Here we go. The Godfather. Now, we're talking about the most interesting man in the world, not you, the most interesting man in the world. The Godfather once made him an offer. Finish what happened.
That he couldn't refuse.
You got it wrong. Anybody in the crowd? The Godfather once made him an offer.
No, that's what I said. That was the wrong.
Craig?
I said that.
But that's not.
It's not right.
But that's not interesting.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that I refused it. The Godfather
He's the
made an
most
offer and I refused.
All right.
And he's still alive. He's still here.
The backstory here is that he offered me a job and I said no. I didn't know there'd be movie rights later.
Okay. All right. You get one more opportunity. Do you get a pattern here? I mean, come on, get some money out of me.
Come on.
This guy right here, he once brought a knife to a gunfight.
And won. Yeah, I'll go with that.
Not quite.
All right.
It's close.
Anyone else want to try?
Somebody.
Hi.
Just to even the odds. Just to even the odds. Are you getting the pattern?
Well, and you got to understand, it's kind of a fake news thing here because it's reputation. It wasn't a gunfight. It was a fight over a gun. See, I'd sold a gun to Paulie Cacciatore, and he claimed it didn't fire. And I said, that's a safety feature, Paulie.
That was a good one.
I thought it was pretty funny.
Wait.
All right. Hey, Jason.
Since I haven't done any Sergeant at Arms finding, I just want to ask you two guys. In the very last commercial that Dos Equis did for the most interesting man in the world, where did he go?
To Venezuela. Sit down, you're done.
They put him on a rocket to the moon. That's
Okay.
All right. All right.
Everyone's a comedian.
Well,
Okay.
let's find another contestant here. How about Alistair Adele? Alistair is an attorney at law. She's now our new Maricopa County attorney, so let's be really nice to her.
And this is going to get in the news.
And she has $100 at stake. Now, if you get it right, you get $10 out of me. All right. No pressure. When he goes bowling, all right, that's it.
That's
all
not
you get.
interesting.
When he goes bowling, okay, anybody from the crowd? Come on, somebody. No, not Why, he throws the bowling ball overhand. Can
Yeah,
you picture that?
I throw the ball overhand. I'm not going to throw it like a girl.
No, all right. Yeah, you got to do a background check on
That'll
him.
keep it even more interesting.
Right, okay. You get another chance.
Oh, good.
All right. He once hit a grand slam home run.
To bury a body? I don't know.
Oh, that's actually kind of clever, but
How'd you know? No, that's not it.
It doesn't give it away.
That's
he
not
once
it.
hit a grand slam home run with only one man on base. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Now, if you were the ump, would you argue with me?
No, maybe not, because he deals with guns. Thank you for your $100. I think we have time for one more here. Duncan Finley. No, he's in law, but it's engineering. That helps to kind of modify it a little bit. Duncan, law and engineering, $75. Let's see, which one do we have for you here? All right. Now, somebody's got to get this one. When he's in Rome... Got it!
Very good.
Somebody.
See, finally got it.
You know what? I'll even make that a $25 contribution. Okay. You've got another shot here, Duncan. Let's see, where are we here?
Well, did we have time for the backstory on that one?
Yeah, well...
No, we don't. Let's go.
All right. Okay, Duncan. He once played Russian roulette with a fully loaded pistol.
No.
I think he sort of got it. That's $10 out of me.
Yeah,
All right.
and the backstory, it was Paulie's pistol.
The pistol that he sold that didn't work.
If you have to explain it, it doesn't work.
See? All right. Go ahead. You know, I've had enough of you.
Okay. Be thirsty, my friends.
All right, let's give it up for the Deuce and his counterpart, Dick. Thank you guys very much. All right, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Mike Stoller. He's the managing partner with Gateway Equity, and he's going to introduce our program for today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Professor David Guston imagines our future. He believes that we all have a disposition toward the future, and thus we all need to be thinking about and acting upon it. With degrees from Yale and MIT, and even a postdoctorate fellowship at Harvard, Professor Guston was teaching at Rutgers University, go Big Ten, when he was recruited to join Arizona State University's Consortium for Science, Policy, and Outcomes in 2005. In 2015, he became the founding director of ASU School for the Future of Innovation in Society. Today, along with a team of 55 faculty members representing more than 40 different disciplines, the school is home to 2 thriving PhD programs, 2 master degree programs, and 2 undergraduate degrees with more in the works. The school's research and teaching revolves around how science, technology, and society interact to create our future. As Professor Guston simply likes to say, the future is for everyone. And who better to give you more insight into this school like none other than Professor Guston.
So it's just going to be me up here and a couple of props that I have for you. And you might want to move that out of the way. So I'm told that I don't have an enormous amount of time. You've already, I think, heard all the jokes that you might possibly be able to stand. So I won't start off with a joke, but I am going to start off with a little bit of biographical material, and by way of that get into a story or a couple of stories about the School for the Future of Innovation and Society at ASU and the work that its faculty does in attempting to create a future that is for everyone. So I grew up nowhere near here, in northern New Jersey, and not that part of northern New Jersey that lots of people see, say as they're flying into Newark Airport over the city of Newark and Port Elizabeth, that one of my colleagues refers to as Mordor. The part of New Jersey, the part of New Jersey that I grew up in is just a little bit to the west and north of there, where literally in the backyard where I grew up, where the house that I grew up in, my parents still live, is a 1,200-acre county park, and from the hill in that park you could see the Manhattan skyline. So I grew up in this incredibly privileged place where I had access both to this wonderful woods and to what was then and is still known as the greatest city in the world. It took me a while to figure out what that place was like, It took growing up, and I was a sort of precocious reader of the New York Times, and when I was growing up, when I was 7, 8 years old, starting to read the newspaper, looking around at the world, so many of the issues at that moment, and now I'll put you into the sort of early 70s, middle 70s, so many of the issues of the world had this strange character. It was the beginning of the environmental movement and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. It was the end of the Apollo program and the United States trying to figure out what we were going to do in space. It was the energy crisis and cars lining up at gas stations because we couldn't figure out how to put our politics and our energy systems together. It was the strange combination of problems that were public problems, but they had something that was scientific or technological at their core. And at that time, I sort of saw, yes, there were scientists over here, and there were politicians over there, and somehow there were these public problems that needed contributions from both sides in order to figure them out. And I said even to myself as a sort of, in essence, as a little kid, what goes in between those things? What goes in between the science and the politics? How is it that we stitch things together? How is it that we bring scientific and technical knowledge and political and social sophistication together in order to solve public problems? So that was something that I was interested in from this very early time. And then when I got to grad school, and I was in Cambridge, Mass. At the other place in Cambridge, Mass. At MIT, I took a class by a wonderful historian by the name of Leo Marx. And Leo had written a book called The Machine in the Garden. And if there are any sort of historians or people who have a cultural interest in the 19th century, this book was about how it was that the young American Republic in the 19th century managed to put together its pastoral and agricultural origin with the coming of industrialization. And this was a real problem for people living their lives in the 19th century, trying to deal with the movement from rural areas to cities, trying to deal with the incipient new modes of production, with railroads, with industrialization, with mass production, the whole bit of the Industrial Revolution, where that word revolution has serious meaning in that it overturns basically the entire way of life of the people involved with it. So how was it that 19th century America could put together its agricultural origins with its technological advance? And so Leo Marx wrote this book called The Machine in the Garden, and it had at its core an understanding of an ideal that he called the middle landscape. And it was sort of embodied by some artwork of the period where, for example, you'd see a golden field of wheat and a steam locomotive chugging through that field. And everything in the landscape painting was in proportion. You had a beautiful 1/3 foreground, 1/3 middle ground, 1/3 background, and the steam locomotive looked all beautiful, and the steam was fluffy against the goldening setting sky and the golden grain in the foreground. But if you were in that picture, you would know that you would smell the soot from the locomotive. you would hear the churning of the pistons over the birds in the field. And quite frankly, you might not want to eat the wheat that was grown in that field for all the ash and soot that was falling on it. So this idea that in the 19th century that you could hold these things in harmony is a fiction. This middle landscape is a fiction. And I looked back at my growing up with this county park and standing on the hill and looking at the New York City skyline. I said, holy crow, I grew up in that fiction. I grew up in a place where I could take advantage of what the natural world had to offer me, and at a comfortable distance, what the full bloom of the social and technological worlds could offer me. And I began to think a little bit more about how we put those things together. How is it that we put the social, the technological, the natural together? Because so often we separate those things. And in the introduction that Mike so generously described, I look about, the role of the School for the Future of Innovation Society is about looking toward the future. And if we think about the ways that we make futures today, the people who get to participate in future making, usually scientists, technologists, engineers, innovators, those people tend to be just sort of in one part of the world, and the rest of us sort of react to the things that they create. And what I want to do is describe to you a couple of ways that the School for the Future of Innovation Society is trying to bring those things together, trying to get, in essence, build the groundwork for a future that is for everyone, where more people get to participate in this process of future making. Because in the view of the school, integrated with things that you probably heard a couple weeks ago from ASU President Michael Crow when he was in front of you, and really in consonance with that lovely mission vision statement that you had up here just a few minutes ago, if we're not building a future that includes everyone, it may not be a future that very many of us actually want to live in. So I want to talk to you about three things. They're all here on this table, and they represent different aspects of the school, but they represent this encompassing idea of the future is for everyone. So it's actually related to something that I heard about earlier about giving laptops to students in need. This is what is called Solar Spell. It is a collaboration between a faculty member of mine named Laura Hosman, who, like me, is a political scientist by training, and some engineers, and the students that she trains both in our school and at ASU's Polytechnic School. And it is a informed social scientific response to a sort of misinformed technology problem-solving situation. So how many people might have heard of the one laptop per child or the $100 laptop effort that went on a number of years ago, and it was headlined by folks who created the Media Lab at MIT, and the idea was to build a really cheap laptop that could connect to the internet and put it in schools in low-resourced areas, particularly in the developing world, and kids would learn by themselves through this laptop that was connected to all the knowledge in the universe. Well, ended up failing on a set of different levels. One was, well, a lot of people in under-resourced areas don't have access to the internet. A lot of people, and even today, a dozen years after one laptop per child, we're still at about 50% who have access. Even if you have access to the internet, it might not be working at the moment because a lot of people in under-resourced areas don't have access to stable electricity. It's also the case that if you give a kid a laptop, or a tablet or a phone in the case of my kid, and tell them to go off and learn through it, they will find all sorts of things that are not necessarily in the curriculum. It could be a game, it could be something else, but what you've done by giving them the laptop and connecting them to all the knowledge in the universe is you've cut out the important role of transmitters, teachers, curators of knowledge. So what this device does is it's solar powered, it's ruggedized, it can survive underwater, it can survive on the top of a mountain, and it projects a local area network that people can connect to with their phones and Phones are vastly more widespread than electricity and wireless. And it connects to a chip that is curated with a set of knowledge inputs that comes from both outside and from within the community. And so particular kinds of things might be health information that is specific to that community, or information about climate impacts that is specific to that community. And people can interact with the solar spell without having to connect to a broader infrastructure that is not available. And these are the faculty member Laura Hosman behind this has done this in the South Pacific. She's done this in South Sudan. She's done this in northern Arizona, where you can't get wireless either. And this is a way of saying that the innovations that we have, the ability to be educated, the ability to use your education to contribute to future making, is something that needs to be more widely distributed across the planet. It's not just a technology that can solve it, but is a conversation between people who build things and people who think about the social context in which they go, like Laura, that create an innovation that actually works for people in various places around the planet. So that's Solar Spell. The second thing, so that is Scribble Bot. And Scribble Bot is something that our faculty do with science museums and science centers across the country. We are involved in a network of some 600 science museums and science centers across the US and another 100 or so around the planet. And Scribble Bot is a way of getting kids as young as 8 years old into conversations about futures. And so what Scribble Bot is a 6-inch piece of swimming pool noodle. He's got legs that are magic markers. You can decorate him any way that you want to, and you stick an electric toothbrush down the middle of Scribble Bot, turn him on, and he dances on a piece of paper and draws. And it's something like, the old, Spirograph, exactly. And it looks like Mike's got Scribble Bot going there. And Scribble Bot draws. And then you can have conversations with kids as young as 8 years old. Is Scribble Bot alive? Why or why not? Is what Scribble Bot is drawing, is that art? Why or why not? If someone came and wanted to buy that nice drawing that Scribble Bot just made, who would get the money? You or Scribble Bot? If Scribble Bot turned itself on and drew on something and ruined it, who would be responsible for that? You or Scribble Bot? And the kicker to this, okay, these are conversations about creativity and responsibility with 8-year-olds. The kicker to this is, of course, in industries where artificial intelligences are really sophisticated, companies are coming face to face with questions about who owns something that might be protected with intellectual property that is generated by an artificial intelligence. Okay, so we're having these conversations with kids as young as 8 years old in ways that they can understand that are like conversations that are going on about technology, about responsibility, about innovation at the highest levels of our economy. And so this is a way of engaging a broader swath of society into these conversations about future making. Third little thing that I have for you, and this is a card game called the American Dream card game. And, it's sort of half tarot and half 3-card Monte. What I'm going to ask you to do is take 3 cards and turn them up on the table and read them as you get them.
Sexual orientation.
Sexual orientation.
Power.
Power.
Raising children.
Raising children, okay. And so now what I would do is ask you if you could just tell a 2 or 3 sentence story about the future of the American dream using those 3 cards. What you think about the American dream and those 3 cards as part of your story.
I think that I could empower my children in raising them to tell them about sexual orientation and its acceptance in civilized society. How about that?
That's great. Now, hang on here. Andrew, come on up. You're going to flip over another card, and tell us what it has. And now you're going to add that card to Jason's story.
Oh, great. Fulfillment. And I would say, so your children will be fulfilled, they'll have complete fulfillment with your story about identifying with sexual orientation, and as you raise your children, it will empower them.
Okay, thank you guys. So that's... So our faculty members, led by a professor of practice named Brian David Johnson, who has come to us actually from Intel. He's a former sort of head futurist at Intel, developed this, in essence, as a conversation piece to be able to engage people and talk about alternative visions of their view of the American dream, more broadly about alternative futures in very informal settings. So, you know, we might use Solar Spell in an under-resourced school. We might use the Scribble Bot in a science museum with a volunteer and a table. We might use these American Dream tarot cards at another big sort of public event, or at a setting like this around tables at a dinner where we're looking for some other activities to spur conversation about alternative futures among the people who are there. Because, you know, you think about everything that you do that is future-oriented, okay? You raise kids and you think about what they're going to do, where they're going to go to school, you know, if and when they're going to get married. You think about the mortgage that you have. You think about buying insurance. You think about all these things that are on a 20 to 30 year, say, time horizon or more. And yet we don't thematize in our education, in our research at universities, in the way that universities engage with other folks. We don't thematize very well thinking about the future. And so having these kinds of conversations is a way that we can get anybody, not just folks who are studying with us, not just folks who are doing research with us, to get anybody thinking about the kinds of futures that they might be engaged in. There are all sorts of other ways. We have faculty members who put together large public conversations about issues including self-driving cars and geoengineering and synthetic biology and so forth. But this is one very low-tech way of getting people to think about it. And so to bring this all together now, how am I doing on time? I'm doing fine. Okay, so I'll have time for some questions. To stitch this all together then, we've got, you know, some relatively high-tech stuff. It's still not the highest tech stuff, but it's not the technology that solves the problems. It's the intersection of the technology and the knowledge about how it's being used, the social aspects of it, what we call technology in society, and that's part of the, or innovation in society, that's part of the name of the school. It's that that gives you the problem-solving power in the world. We've got things like the Scribble Bot that reach out, that engage whole hosts of people, in this case kids, for whom, you know, the future is really being built outside of their own control at the moment, but to reach out to people who don't normally have a say in the way futures are being constructed. And then, you know, very mundane kinds of things like these decks of cards that can cause conversations to happen that don't normally happen in the world. And so by doing this sort of interdisciplinary work with the technology in society, doing the engagement work with the Scribble Bot, doing discussions about alternative futures, we are hopefully in the process of building, not just through our curriculum, but through our engagement and research activities as well, a future that could be for everybody. Thank you very much. And would love some questions. Yeah. The executive summary of the answer is that, you know, in truth, nobody really knows whether more jobs get created or more jobs get lost through this kind of innovation. That if somebody tells you that they're sure that more jobs are going to be created, ask them which jobs. But, you know, we don't, you know, our tendency is to take job creation through innovation on faith and deal with the consequences of job loss afterward. And so for the people who, drive taxi cabs, for the people who drive trucks, we're taking it on faith that their jobs are going to be transformed into something that is not necessarily going to benefit them, but that might benefit everybody else, so that we might be able to help them. That's the executive summary level.
That Wi-Fi setup that sets up the local area network.
Spell, yeah.
You said that she tested it in the Sudan, South Sudan.
Yeah.
What if it falls into the wrong hands?
Well, the distribution of this is relatively well controlled at the moment. She's actually, not at the level of mass distribution yet. It always goes into the field with trained individuals who train the people who are going to be using it. And there's nothing really sophisticated in terms of the technology that is potentially dangerous.
Eventually, it will get on the internet and people can make their own. And are there any security considerations about that?
Yeah, for this suite of technologies, this is all stuff that that you could learn how to make without learning how to make it from this. And the real power of this is the social networks that are built around it. Now, if you wanted to use it like any other kind of training device, yes, you could curate it with nefarious information and use it in under-resourced areas. Right now, we don't have that problem, like I said, because we don't have quite enough of them to mass distribute them, and that they all go with people who train the people on site. But it might be an interesting exercise to challenge Laura with the idea that, that there could be training camps of people who would curate this with information that would be, that could help people build things that would be problematic, like it provides explosive devices and things like that. And then that could be a seed for more efficient transmission. You'd probably need more technological savvy you'd probably already have the technological savvy to find out that information from a variety of other sources than this. This is, I think, specifically designed for a physical infrastructure that is incomplete, if you will, for a schoolhouse that doesn't have an electrical outlet. Yeah. No, those. Yeah.
My question is, it could work in people all in a series of caves in the mountains. They could just pick it out there and they could have their own network, and it wouldn't be able to be tapped by our intrepid national security.
It doesn't project very far. Yes, anybody in the cave around one of these devices with their own cell phones, but I'm not sure what it would add to that particular environment beyond what could otherwise be gotten. You'd have to curate the chip in a particular way with particular sets of information. So, it's a problem we're thinking about, and quite frankly, those dual-use issues are always worth thinking about, and always worth thinking about as early in the design process as possible. And those are exactly the kinds of questions that I, as a political scientist, ask my science and engineering colleagues, well, have you thought about? So those are exactly the right kind of questions that we want to surface in discussion.
As I go around seeing young people, they are sitting using their cell phones or their various electronic devices. And you ask them a question, and they don't stop and think about it. They get out their cell phone and get the answer off that.
Yeah.
Are we going to raise generations of people who depend on their electronic devices rather than their brain?
Well, you've described my 13-year-old son. Among his first complete sentences was the command to either me or his mom, doodle it. Meaning Google it, meaning I've gotten through your brain with my why questions, and I still want to know more, so you have to go to the world brain rather than to your own brain. I'll give you sort of my perspective, both as a scholar and as a father in this regard, that the struggle with kids and devices is a tough one. It is the source between me and my son, and also between me and my wife and our son, of among the worst conflicts we have in our little family. It's also the case that that device represents more of the world that he will live in than the World Book Encyclopedia that was on my shelf that I grew up in represents the world that he is going to live in. That, I tend not to be one who says this is what the future is going to be like, because I think we all have important things to say about that future, and we may not end up living in the future that we anticipate. We usually don't end up living in the future that we expect. There are all sorts of things that get to change. But it is the device is an integrated part of his social world and his intellectual world, and at least in the way that he has experienced it, he just turned 13, so he is on the cusp of all these teenage kinds of things. He's not on social media, for example, yet, and so on, but it is a device that is going to allow his brain to develop differently, which it already has, and we've lost control over that. The research basically shows that if you're in contact with these things from a very young age, your brain gets wired just a little bit differently, but your brain gets wired differently depending on what kinds of input you get as a young child, regardless of what device you're actually holding, whether it's a book or a television or a tablet. He still holds books. He's still an avid reader. And the way that he's able to supplement what he can learn through the written word, what he can learn through conversation, through this world brain thing, I think is quite fabulous. So there are real deficits in some things, but real opportunities in others. And I think the way that as, as a scholar, as the group of faculty and students that I have in my school are trying to do is try to think seriously about what those opportunities and what those deficits really look like, and try to understand the difference between the two of them as soon as possible, and begin to develop pathways and structures that lead us toward the opportunities and away from the deficits. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. It was a very formative discussion, and on behalf of our Phoenix Rotary 100, we have made a small donation in your name to our fund this year at Operation School Bell. So Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.